Hello, instrumentalists, and welcome back to another episode of Making Decisions on the Violin. In this series, we take a look at a piece of music that I either have never played or haven't played in quite some time. And in doing so, I make decisions on fingerings, perhaps some phrasings and bowings as well. And I give options to various solutions for spots. We're going to continue off where we left off from the last episode, which is continuing our work on the piece called Praeludium and Allegro, written by Kreisler. This piece is a virtuosic kind of showpiece, and the first page, which is what we looked at last video, is an introduction, whereas this second page is very much the Allegro and is very fast and virtuosic. So in the previous video, we were talking about kind of artistic fingerings or preferences. In this video, on the other hand, we're probably going to be working out practical fingerings, or fingerings that are just going to make this at all possible. Because as I said at the top, this is actually a pretty difficult piece of music, and it's a lot of fun to play, and luckily it was written by an amazing violinist, so a lot of it actually works out quite nicely in the hand. In order to play this piece, you're going to need to know how to be comfortable with string crossings, shifting, and off-the-string strokes. With all that out of the way, let's jump right into this piece. We're going to take a look at the second page and just kind of sight read. I mean, I've played this before, but it's been quite some time. I'll try my best not to make any serious mistakes. I can already tell you I'm going too fast for the rest of this. I'm going to slow it down so I can have a chance. Okay, lots of issues. Pretty tricky stuff in this first half of this second page. Let's break it down. So, I gotta say, playing through it at a variety of tempos as I kind of meandered through this first half of this page, I actually think that the fingerings that are suggested in this edition are quite good, and those that aren't are pretty easy to figure out. I think that the fingerings that I chose throughout are going to work if I practice them, or if you practice them. They're going to work out nicely even up to tempo. But let's talk about what they are and what alternatives we might have. To start, we start in first position. Pretty straightforward. If you wanted some kind of portamento or slide in the beginning, you could shift in the beginning. But you would want to get down right away, because we definitely want to play this next section in first position. It just works out quite nicely in first position. It's pretty clunky, it's a lot of string crossings, but it works out quite nicely in the hand and bow. And although it is Allegro, it is also Allegro molto moderato, so we don't need to take it too fast. So I think that fingering just staying in first is going to be quite nice there. And we can stay in first through this next section as well. I think very much the idea here is to play one note on each string. Whenever playing a piece written by a true virtuosic violinist, as this piece is, it's pretty often a good idea to try and figure out what they were doing, because they were actually most likely writing this on the violin. A lot of composers will write with the music in their head or at a piano and then give it to a violinist. But people like Kreisler most likely worked it out on the violin first and then put the pen to paper. So most likely when he's doing this here, The idea here is to block chords with the left hand and allow the bow to do the fun stuff. So we're basically just fingering triple stops. Hopefully in tune. And then we're allowing the bow to do the tricky stuff, which is this fun string crossing. And it works out quite nicely. Afterwards, in this edition, it suggests we use an open A to use to shift. And we're going to shift all the way up to 4th position. So we're going to use this open A to find that 4th position. And for me, 4th position is right when my hand, or the palm of my hand, kind of runs into the body of the instrument. So it's usually relatively easy to find. It's also where your 4th finger is going to naturally find that harmonic. So if you're comfortable finding that harmonic, this shift shouldn't take too much practice to figure out. And we're just in 4th position for that measure, and then we use another open string to change. Open D, shifting down to 1st position. Now in the edition, it doesn't explicitly write that we're shifting down to 1st position, but it does offer the suggestion of using an open D, and we're going to go ahead and keep that same idea where we see these string crossings, this kind of blocking of triple stops in the left hand, and then allowing the bow to figure out the rest. And we get to have a lot of fun with that, because it rolls really nicely in the right hand and allows us to really move forward and have this sense of ease, which is what virtuosity is all about. Virtuosity. What virtuosity is all about. It's important when playing showpieces to make sure that the audience doesn't know how difficult it is for you. So we have the end of the 2nd line. And we have our first shift where we don't have the benefit of an open string, where we have to go from this 2nd finger 1st position to a 3rd position. But it's a pretty easy shift. However, if you notice, in my practice, I'm really taking advantage of my knowledge of the shift, which is that we're going from 2nd finger on the C natural, and we're actually finding that E natural. Even though the E natural doesn't actually exist in the music, we're going to use that as a guide in our mind. We won't actually explicitly play it with the bow, at least in practice, but we will do it in preparation. When we're playing the piece in a performance, we would never do that, but behind closed doors, in the practice room, absolutely we can use that. Right, with the correct bowing, of course. So let's see. And then once again, we have to shift down to 1st position in tune. And likewise, in practice, we can figure out what the mechanics of that shift are, or what the guide shift is. Another word for that I like to use is the fundamental shift. What is the fundamental shift here at the end of this first measure in the 3rd line? We're on a 3rd finger B natural. This is 3rd position. And I like to define the fundamental shift as just what the old finger does. And what I mean by that is what finger is departuring for the shift, where is it going? And the answer is almost always going to be, where does it end up in the next position on the current string? So all these questions are going to end up in this answer. We have a 3rd finger B natural on the D string. It's going to shift from 3rd position down to 1st position on the D string. So it should be finding a G natural before we find our 1st finger on the E natural, which is the next note. Of course, in practice, we're going to try and hide that through releasing pressure in the bow and also releasing pressure in the left hand. With good coordination, we should be able to hide it quite nicely. Now we're in 1st position on this 2nd measure of the 3rd line. And we're going to shift up to second position, which is exactly what's suggested in this edition, which I quite like. And again, if we're trying to figure out what the fundamental shift is, the questions we ask are what finger is departuring, what string is it on, what position is it starting on, and what position is it ending in. When answering all those questions, we figure out what the fundamental shift is. We're starting on a first finger B natural on the A string. It's shifting from first position to second position. That means it's going to be finding a C natural or C sharp. I like to think of this as finding a C sharp even though it's not in the key signature, because the next note that we're going to play with that first finger is going to be an F sharp, which is directly across the string from that C sharp. So if we find that C natural, we're just adding a little bit of extra workload where we have to then not only move the finger over a string, but also continue to adjust it for that high 1 position. So if we look at that shift, it should look something like this. Once again, we shift back down to first position. Well, this time we're kind of going to a half position. So in this measure, this is the last measure of the third line, we're finding that kind of half position for a beat, where we're doing a low 1 and low 2, extra low 2, so that we're using second finger on that B natural and F sharp. But it only lasts for a beat because we quickly move back into first position. Now, whenever we do this kind of thing where we go out of position for a very short time, and we otherwise kind of feel like we're in a position, we have two options. We can either decide to fully shift into half position, then fully shift out of it, or we can shift to first position and then feel like we're stretching out of first position for a beat. This is usually my preferred method. So if we take a look at this third measure of the third line, this is when we're in second position on the F sharp. We're going to find first position, meaning our A natural third finger is going to find that G natural. And then we're going to stretch our first finger and our second finger down. But our thumb and our double contact, meaning our contact between our thumb and our index joint on the violin, are going to be relatively consistent with a true first position. We find that first position, thumb is there in first position, but our first finger and second finger are going to move back beyond, and we're stretching out of first position into half position. And then they just stretch back. And it's pretty comfortable. It's a little bit easier, but for some people, their hands are maybe a little bit smaller or a little bit less flexible. And for those people, it's maybe easier to just block around and actually truly shift. So we find that true shift where that thumb goes all the way down to half position, and then it moves up a half step. And that's totally fine too. We're still in first position. This is just like the beginning. Now again, we have an open string that we can use to shift, and we're going to shift to third position. So again, in this third beat of this measure, we're going to shift down to second position. Or you can shift down to first. If you shift down to first, you're done shifting, which is kind of nice. It is just a bigger shift. If you shift down to second, you do have to shift again, and you'll have kind of two consecutive shifts. However, shifting on the third beat allows us to use a half step shift in that first finger from that G natural to that F sharp. And then it's just a whole step from there to get back to first position. So basically it's boiling down to whether or not you want to do one bigger shift or two smaller shifts. It's really up to you and your preference. I don't know what mine is, and honestly, I would probably flip-flop until I practice both and figure out what is most comfortable for me. Without any practice, I'm going to opt for the smaller shifts because I can kind of finagle them. So we're still just in first position for all of this. And I would just be in first position until the very end for that harmonic. You can even have a little bit of a slide there. I find that quite nice. Now, in this section, yes, there's not really any fingering choices, in my opinion, once you get into first position. You're just going to play it in first. But it is a question of how to execute. And I think one of the best things here is to realize that it's one of those situations, just like in our string crossing measures, where, yes, a lot is going on here. Right, a lot is going on in the right hand. However, really, our left hand is just blocking either a quadruple stop or a triple stop, meaning we're just finding 4 or 3 notes in the left hand, some of which are open strings. If we look at the third measure of this line, we can just find that quadruple stop. And we can actually practice these like quarter notes. And practice a little more so that it works. Bottom line is you practice them like quarter notes, you figure out the blocking in the hand. Just make sure that when you're doing that, that you're actually practicing making sure all of the quadruple stop or the triple stop is down at once. We don't want to get in the habit of where we're kind of blocking these chords and we're preparing in a kind of sequence. We really want to build up the hand so that it learns these as blocks. So finding out how my hand moves from this chord to the next one with one motion. From this chord to the next one with one motion. We gotta figure out which fingers on which strings are moving. Between this chord and the next, our third finger is going to move from the G natural on the D string, and it's going to jump over to the E string. Our fourth finger is not currently down, but it's going to need to be placed on the A string. Our second finger is low currently on the A string, and it's going to need to move to a high position on the D string. Between this chord and the next, our third finger is just going to move from only being on the E string to on the A and E string. Otherwise, the second finger is staying where it is. Between this chord and the next, our third finger is going to return to just being on the E string. Our second finger is going to move down from a high position to a low position, and it's going to move to the A string. You can see how tedious this is, but this is really what needs to go down in practice for this to work. Once you've worked that out slowly with quarter notes, you can move on to rhythms and break it up so that you do top to bottom, bottom to top, with various rhythms. You can reverse the rhythm, of course. And always when doing rhythm practice, take advantage of the pauses to figure out what needs to happen quickly in the next sequence. I myself need to practice this so that it sounds better. A lot of scratchiness, a lot of intonation cracks, but that's not what we're here for today. We're just here to discuss fingerings. We're going to continue on after this section. Here we just... This is one of those spots where it seems very obvious what Kreisler likely did on his instrument when he was working this out. So he's in first for this whole thing. And now we have a pattern emerging where we're doing 4-1-3-0. And it ends there. So the question in practice for this fingering, yes, we have the fingering figured out, it's pretty straightforward, is to figure out where the changes in intervals are on the left hand. So it seems we always have this perfect fourth here, between 4 and 1. So we could practice that in reverse, just because that's the shifts that we're doing. Ooh, I gotta practice that. The difficulty in this kind of a thing is always twofold. There's always a difficulty with understanding the rate of contraction in the hand because the intervals get smaller as we go up the instrument. And there's also a difficulty in this kind of no man's land between where we're in this low position and our double contact is between our thumb and our index joint, and the higher positions like fourth position onward where our double contact changes and now it's no longer this index joint but rather that releases, our thumb stays, and now our hand or the palm of our hand is making contact with the instrument. And the transition between those kinds of positions is always a little bit problematic. So I would especially pay close attention to that kind of third position on in this work when I'm practicing. So figuring out exactly what the rate of that palm raising is, how much I move up between each of those positions. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. In addition to those fourths that we can kind of establish as our goalposts or our hand frame throughout the positions, we also have our relationship between 3 and 4, which changes. So we have that perfect fourth that doesn't change. Right, we have that 4-1 relationship. However, we have this third finger that does. We have a low 3 there, which is a major 6th away from 4. And then in the next position, we have it again. However, in the next one, we don't. Now we have a higher 3, creating that minor 6th. And then we have that same thing again. And then finally, we have returned to that lower third finger. So you can kind of check the intonation on those by playing those intervals. After you've done a bunch of shedding on that, you just move on. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be done in a single day. Once again, we have another example of this open string bringing us down. So this was the same exact thing. We have the open string that brings us down. Now we just have some sharps here for a little bit of a different harmony. We go into B minor. Still, I think first position is working well. Let's see if there's an alternative. Yeah, I guess one alternative would be to avoid one of these big string crossings, which would be to get into second position just for this octave. Here. And then getting right back down to first. Because I'm pretty sure that's the only time when if we don't do that, where we're being asked to string cross over a string, go from G to A, bypassing D entirely. So that's an option, I think. The nice thing is we have an open string to accomplish the shift over it. I just don't necessarily believe it's more comfortable to shift, because I don't think we're going to play this so fast that we can't do the string crossing cleanly. So it is an option, but I certainly will prefer the simpler one, which is to just stay in first position. And I think it's okay if it brings out a little bit of that hemiola or that kind of accentuated offbeat rhythms or inconsistent rhythms. Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but I mean, I don't hate it. It's kind of up to you what you want to do in that section, but I definitely don't think it would be crazy to add in accents in various places. This is all about making a statement, I really think, and making it as interesting as possible. It's pretty simple stuff. It's just little arpeggios, and I think what makes it interesting is the frequency at which it jumps up and down, because it's not even. It's not on every beat. And so I think accentuating it is perfectly fine. Going from this piano here, same thing. I'm just in first position. Ooh, okay. Don't like that. So what it's suggesting is to do a harmonic on the D string, and then a fourth finger, and then shifting down. That's a lot of tasks for one little pinky. I don't know if I love it. Let's see if there's an alternative. Even if you wanted to do the harmonic, I don't see why you couldn't just do a third finger on the C natural that follows it. Because it doesn't really matter if you do a fourth or a third. Like, being closer at this point doesn't really matter. You're still doing a big shift in a short period of time. I don't hate it if we do a third finger. Actually, I think it works quite nicely. And then we're using a nice open string here to shift. And another open string. Open strings are great. Another open string afterwards. We got so many consecutive open strings that we get to use to shift here. Another. So I think here we would shift down to first position. This is not really following any of our rules of shifting. Our general rules of thumb for shifting are to shift on a beat, shift in between half steps, shift over open strings, and yeah, that's basically it. Those are good rules of thumb for shifting. In this case, we're shifting not on a strong beat, not over a half step, and yeah, we're breaking these rules. But I think it's okay. However, I do think we do have some alternatives. Which is just to find a shift earlier on. Almost found something there. Open to shift. So what I just did was I got down to first position, and how we get down, there's a couple options. But what I just did was played an open E to get down. And then we're already in first, and we're going to use a fourth finger here to play this octave. I don't hate it. I don't love it though. Sometimes when you're working out fingerings, you're looking for that aha moment, and this is not it. Honestly, I don't hate breaking the rules of shifting and just shifting there. Let's see. We could shift on the beat. This is just a tricky kind of shift. So shifting between the B natural and the A. However, one of the difficult shifts that we have to do is when shifting down and shifting from a lower finger to a higher finger down. Does that make sense? So we're going from a B natural third finger, shifting down to a fourth finger. It would be easier, it's much easier, much more natural to shift from a third finger to a second finger down, or a third finger to a first finger down. And then on the way up, the equivalent would be the same kind of thing, like shifting from a fourth finger to a first finger on the way up is pretty awkward, but it's not like we never do it. One of the common practices in shifting up is between second finger and one or third finger and one. Rarely do we see this kind of fourth finger to one. And likewise, we rarely shift down to a fourth finger. It's just kind of awkward. However, it can work, especially when you're shifting down to first position, which is so well known to our bodies at this point. So it's not really such a concern, because we just, rather than thinking of it as a shift, we could think of it as more of just a return to position. So we could do it. If you really want to avoid any kind of portamento. However, I mean, we could reduce the amount of portamento, obviously. I'm kind of being the devil's advocate here for that portamento. Right, that's not super egregious. I think it's okay. In fact, it's going to be my final answer for what I'll be doing. Yeah, I like it. So that brings us to the last page of the piece, which I think I'll save for the next video. If you like this format, please let me know in the comments below. If you learned anything, I'd like to hear that as well. If you have any tips or tricks for this piece, or any fingerings that you do that I didn't mention, let me know in the comments below. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot, and it makes sure that you don't miss a future video. Thanks so much, and happy practicing.